Okay, you are listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Tonight on the program, we will be continuing our City Council preview with Council members Kendra Brooks and Isaiah Thomas. And in the later half of the show, we will discuss the forgiveness of some student debt. But first, we're going to open up with our interview with Council member Kendra Brooks. All right, Councilmember Brooks, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The first thing I'd like to ask you about, what is it like to be in the minority on City Council? And what exactly does that mean?
What is it like? I think that's kind of like twofold for me. Like one, it's like being in the minority, I really don't have anyone to caucus with. I had to create a pseudo caucus, more of a progressive caucus, as opposed to just being a Democrat. Like I didn't have a party to kind of bounce ideas off and policy. So that was one. But I think being in the minority, it also gives me like a level of freedom to be able to move on policy and legislation, you know, how I choose. Like it's really all of our stuff, all our work is centered around our constituency and the progressive base that got me elected. So we're able, you know, and it's almost like a gift and a curse. It's, we have to work harder to build allies around some issues, and then other issues, you just kind of learn your colleagues and you know who you can go to for support depending on what it is. So it's been like a mixed bag of kind of getting to know and understand the council body, as well as learning how, you know, council works and creating a space for myself that has never been there before and gaining respect along the way. I think most of it is about earning the respect of my colleagues. And that's how we're able to get things done. Because we don't have to agree. We just need to respect each other enough to, you know, to disagree a lot of times. So.
Yeah. So the fall session is set to begin in a couple of weeks. What are your top priorities when council gets started again?
Well, this when we come back, we're planning to introduce protection for abortion access for those who are traveling to seek abortions. And we're doing that along with Planned Parenthood, ACLU, Abortion Liberation Fund, New Voices Reproductive, Assets Matters, Women, a bunch of Women Against Abuse, CHOP, and my colleague, Councilmember Gim. We been considering this legislation as well around shield laws for abortion providers who say that, the shield laws are to protect the abortion providers from taking clients from out of state. We want to make sure that people have the right to come do that in Pennsylvania. And there are a couple of us, a package of bills that we looked at that was just introduced in Pittsburgh. And we're working on mirroring some of that here in Philadelphia. And that's something we plan on doing when we come back in the fall. And then we've been ongoing with our wealth tax. We have a hearing scheduled for September 21st in City Council chambers. And, you know, it would tax intangible personal property like stocks and bonds at a rate of 4%, which is $4 on every thousand. And it's anticipated that we can raise over $2 million a year with this. And this is, you know, money we see as, you know, everyone paying their fair share. And part of paying their fair share means make sure that we're able to get money back into city funds to be able to, you know, support the programs that we have been advocating forever, whether it's Parks and Rec, public transit, safe public transit systems, as well as we talked about pools. All of them weren't open this summer. So this is like a long-term strategy to gain more revenue for city services and actually, reinvest back in Black and brown neighborhoods, because we've seen a divestment in those neighborhoods and we haven't seen a return even back to prior COVID dollars. So that's what the wealth tax kind of encompasses, and we're looking forward to that hearing. And I'm still working with this community gardens. We know that, US Bank has liens on about 100 parcels of land throughout the city. And we still continue to work with the administration and council president and community organizers and the gardeners and US Bank to find a permanent solution to all these bank liens, because the reality is, like, these folks have been tending to this land for generations. And we're trying to make sure that, in neighborhoods that are, highly gentrified or becoming highly gentrified, that the neighbors are able to protect the property they have tended to over years. And keep in mind, this is properties that were blighted and abandoned, and the neighbors took it upon themselves to revitalize it. And we want to make sure that they can, still have access to that land. So it's been an ongoing fight. We talked about it a lot during the budget season, and we're still in negotiations around that. And finally, seniors in housing. We realized that, we've been doing the senior in housing series since I started in council. And we're going to continue to have this seniors in housing series that we've been working on, because we realize that, our seniors are some of our most vulnerable population. And if we don't do anything to preserve the current housing crisis that they're in, we're doing a disservice to our city. And one other thing I almost forgot was our rent control. I introduced the hearing on rent control, was the first thing I introduced in council. However, we have not had a public hearing as of yet. So we're looking to reactivate that work around rent stabilization sometimes in the fall or the spring. With the pandemic underway, it's been really hard to get the community groups and everyone together to have a solid hearing. So we're planning on reactivating that, because we realize that, rents are increasing regularly. Like, we have calls every day in our office about, people being displaced because of increase in rent. And we need to do something to, ensure our citizens here in Philadelphia.
A lot of the things you just mentioned are things that would help decrease the level of poverty in the city. Attacking different areas of poverty. Do you think, in general, council is going to push more anti-poverty programs this fall? And if so, what do you think they might look like, in addition to what you just mentioned?
I can't speak for what council will do as a whole. I am very clear on my priorities and the things that are most important to me, as well as to my constituency and what we're hearing. And I'm certain that my colleagues will be moving on the same page. A lot of the things that we spoke about, we have some level of support from my council colleagues, but I'm not really clear on what they plan on introducing at this time.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, and thank you so much, Council Member, for giving us your time.
You're welcome.
My question centers around the word progressive. I interviewed the executive director for Netroots Nation last week, and I asked him the question I'm about to ask you now. When you talk to folks in most communities of color about progressives and about progressivism, while they're more than happy to sign on to progressive ideas, they're not real fond of progressives themselves, because there is a perception of a bit of racism and anti-Semitism within the progressive movement. How has Philadelphia managed to avoid that? And if it hasn't, what's being done to kind of clear that out?
That's a really good question, Denise. I see myself as a progressive. I haven't experienced anti-Semitism and those things, particularly in the progressive spaces that I came up through. I came up through community organizing and activism. You know, the organizations that I organize with are groups that kind of help me understand the needs of my community. Not that I didn't know what the needs were, I really didn't know how to organize to get the things done. So for me, aligning with the progressive movement was more about aligning with folks that were showing me, my neighbors, and other folks how to organize to get our needs met. Whether it was around schools, whether it was around neighborhoods against the power plant. There's so many different things that I've organized around that came out of the progressive movement. So for me, I haven't seen that level. I can't speak to anti-Semitism or racism, but in that case, it's racism everywhere. And when we start talking about politics in general, it's a level of elitism and classism that floats throughout all politics that no one talks about that as well. So I don't know how to say we have been able to escape it here in Philadelphia. I just know that there are other folks like me where I'm from with my same experiences, meaning, low, moderate income folks, impacted folks, also college educated folks that believe that, the city that we live in can be so much better. And we gravitate around things that are beyond the status quo. So the things that, one perfect example, during the pandemic, most of the things in my lifetime of organizing that they said could not happen. And during my organizing, it was a waste of time. And I was a crazy person for fighting for these things happened. Just like that. Every child has a computer in school. That was one of the first things I organized around when I first started organizing, making sure kids have access to internet, right? High-speed internet, discounted to free. They said that was impossible. So all of these things, for me, came out of the progressive movement. And, people can dispute that, but I know for me, it has given me a home, a political home for my ideology, for my values, and a place for me to grow. Keep in mind, I had no idea that I would be in politics now. My path to politics came solely out of fighting for the things that my neighbors in my community wanted. And I found those things to be grounded in progressive movement. So now that people are painting progressive to be a bad word, I still embrace it because those are the values that brought me this, out of, my community and got me activated. And I will continue to fight around those values as we move forward. So I try, like they said, I'm the black face of the progressives, whatever that means. I know a lot of black progressives. So I try not to engage in these anti-progressive conversations because right now I feel like my values are the values of the people. It doesn't have to have a label. It has to be rooted in the things that our communities need.
Okay. Now, as someone who started out being an activist in terms of the city schools, right now they're about to open, but they're short of teachers and there's other issues that are going on. Are you paying attention to those? And so what things are you saying to your fellow council members about what council can do to help with these issues?
I mean, we realized that we're approaching a teacher shortage for years. So we have been, as soon as I came into office, we've been advocating for ways for the school district to do general recruitment because it's not just short teaching staff, they're short staff overall. And we realize this is a national crisis. One of the main things we need to pay teachers more, but that's not a decision that city council makes. We do offer funding to the school district minimal, but we don't have the ultimate decision to determine how that is exactly done. That is a school board decision as well as the superintendent.
Now, Larry asked you about being a part of the minority in council and the fact that the minority consists basically of you and two Republicans who probably don't even talk to each other all that much, if we're honest with ourselves. How do you create coalitions? Because you mentioned that you have to kind of make your own coalitions. How do you create those within council?
I create those because I'm an excellent organizer. I have, one of the things, one of my colleagues, did you mention, one of the Republican colleagues said I was the most collaborative person he's ever worked with. Now, keep in mind, he's been in council most of my life. So to me, that was a big compliment. I don't mind reaching across the aisle, reaching across interests, and talking to everyone about any piece of legislation that we're moving. So even when we did paid sick leave, we met with the folks who were fighting us tooth and nail for it not to pass. Because in order for you to have a clear understanding and to get to a win, you need to know, what the opposition is. So for me, I think that's how I build coalitions. Folks see me as a person that I'll listen, I'll take it in consideration. I do have my bottom line on, when you come down to a negotiation, but the fact that I'm willing to listen and make sure that, every part of this conversation is heard. I felt like when I first started, they tried to give me a hard way to go, saying I didn't talk to the opposition, but now we go out of our way to speak to everyone. So I already know what your problem is with this bill, but I need you to get me to a win. So you don't have to agree on all of it, but what can you agree on? Without compromising the needs of the other folks on the other end. And I think I've done an excellent job, especially when we talk about paid sick leave, each iteration of it, which was very hard. We talk about the housing work that we've done. We talked about those probably were the hardest. I think the paid sick leave and Emergency Housing Protection Act. We even got Alan Dowd to sign off on that. That's a win for me. If you can get someone who is a landlord, a huge landlord in the city, to agree on, some fair housing stuff, that's a win. And I accredit that to both myself and my team taking a restorative approach to getting things done. I don't take a no. I can take not right now. And let's figure out how we can get to a win, because it doesn't have to be a yes and no. We need a win. We need a win for the people. And I think that's the approach my team takes, and that's how we're able to build coalitions, across issues.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPN.
Thank you, Denise. Councilmember, I just have two questions left for you. What should the city do with its budget surplus?
Oh, so many other things. Like, we realize that, Parks and Recs aren't still funded up to full capacity. We need to make sure we have young folks that have things to do for out of school time program, which is necessary, especially with the gun violence crisis that we have in the city. If we have what they say, the idle mind is a devil's workshop. So if we don't have anything for young people to do, that's one thing. We can, we did this commercial corridor cleanup and more street cleanup and, towards sanitation and make sure our city is clean and not just in places where people visit. I'm talking about in every neighborhood. We need to make sure that, trash is collected. If we do something around blight, making sure we're invested in, cleaning out vacant lots and making sure abandoned properties are boarded up and, so people aren't able to get into it and don't look bad. So many homeless services, like we can definitely do more investment in the homeless services. Eviction protection, we need to make sure people are able to stay in home. Rental assistance, there are a list of things. We're a city that's a poor city, so there are a lot of city services we can invest in. I think that we just need to have vision, and I think if we have vision, we'll clearly be able to spend whatever surplus we have in the way to move our city towards, the city of our dreams. And one of the things I didn't talk about, when we talk about community safety, you didn't bring this up, but it just popped in my mind. When we talk about emergency first aid responders, when we have the mental health professionals responding to mental health crises, that isn't fully funded. And that's another program that we could afford to fully, if we had the money, we could fully fund to see some real results here in our city.
And whether we like it or not, we are officially or unofficially, depending on how you look at it, in the 2023 mayoral election, what qualities are you looking for in a new mayor?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. What qualities? Strong leadership, strong vision, intentionality, like a plan for the city, a long-term plan for the city, not just for tomorrow, but what is it going to look like in 8 years? I think when we think about, where we are right now as a city, certain things our mayor could not predict, but it goes back to what I said. All of the things that I organized around my whole lifetime, all of a sudden became available to city residents during the pandemic. And we had money to pay for it. All of it wasn't just federal funds. We were able to pull money out from our city funds to take care of some of the things that we paid for. And I think if we have a mayor with vision, they'll be able to create a vision for our city 8-10 years down the line to hopefully bring us out of the largest, poorest city in the country, to do something around gun violence, and to make sure our city is back on its feet.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we would like to thank Councilmember Kendra Brooks for joining us on Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, or on our website, www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. And I'd like to bring in our very own Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I always enjoy speaking with Councilmember Brooks, and I thought she had a lot of interesting things to say. And I just want to give people a little bit of a preview of something that's going to be coming up in a couple weeks. Her wealth tax bill is going before I believe the Finance Committee on September 21st. So we're going to be following that pretty closely. So about less than a month from now, about 3 weeks, we'll be talking more about that, and maybe the council member will come back on with us to tell us where we are with that after that hearing.
Well, I hope so, because if they can actually get a wealth tax passed through city council and not have it struck down by the state, because everything that Philadelphia does, it seems like that could actually benefit Philadelphians. The folks in Harrisburg strike down through preemption. But if they can manage to get this bill passed and to have it so it's not struck down, that would really be a boost for the nation's poorest big city. Because, for a lot of us, it's really hard to sit and look at like $2 million penthouses in the at 2 Liberty Place and all these other things, and not ask ourselves, okay, why do you get a 10-year tax abatement for that, and plus you don't have to pay anything else? It's just wrong, and it's such a glaring example of wealth inequality that it's ridiculous. So it'll be interesting to see if it gets passed, and it'll be interesting to see if the state doesn't preempt it if it is passed. But we can't assume it will be passed. You need 9 members of council to pass anything. And even though there's the only person on council that this would have really impacted has since resigned from council to run for mayor, you still have enough people within council who might think that this would be an impediment to job growth. Now, having grown up in the 80s and seen the trickle-down economics doesn't, I'm still trying to figure out how not taxing people who have more than enough money to pay the tax grows jobs. No one has been able to explain that to me in the entire time, from the 1980s. And you're right, Larry, it doesn't work. It never has worked. David Stockman, the person who gave us trickle-down economics, even said it doesn't work. So I'm wondering why we still continue to try it. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this bill.
And just a note on that, whenever the trickle-down economics comes up, my blood gets up. But just all you have to do to understand what trickle-down economics really does is look at Kansas under Sam Brownback about 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, they were selling adult toys to pay for stuff. And
that
when your economy gets so messed up that you're selling the kind of stuff that you can get at the erogenous zone on South Street to make ends meet, you've got problems.
That is and I've read about this extensively because I was so infuriated by it. But that is what every conservative dreamed about. They did in Kansas. And it bankrupted the schools. It almost ruined their higher education system, the University of Kansas system. And it had so many other problems that it caused that even, and Kansas is a conservative state. You had conservative legislators saying, we have to pass taxes again. We have to raise taxes and put them back in place. And, that state still has not recovered from that.
No, it hasn't.
And they won't for a while. And when you ask conservatives about that, all you do is you get, but they keep advocating for the same policies over and over and over again.
Well, yeah, right now in Mississippi, as we speak, the city of Jackson cannot flush its toilets, has no running water, has had to boil its water since July. There's no ice, it's hot, and you can't take a shower or anything in the water because the water system has basically been allowed to decay. And the governor of Mississippi sent a bill that would have allowed a bond to be issued to fix the water system. And he vetoed it, calling it socialism. Now, first of all, I'm tired of people using the word socialism without knowing what socialism means. It's kind of like woke or John with me anymore. If you do not know how to use the word, don't do it. Socialism, the only thing in America that we have that's even remotely close to socialism is Medicare and Medicaid. And that's not even really socialism. But socialism, because you have so many people who are willing to listen to people who don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know what they're talking about either. Socialism has become this panacea for any right-wing politician who decides that they don't want to pay for something. And now you have people in a roughly 82% Black city in the South that cannot do simple stuff like flush their toilets, and they are about to run out of bottled water.
And
meanwhile, the governor's got a tanker truck full of water in front of his house.
So you've hit the two reasons. First of all, they don't want to spend money on anything. But more importantly, they don't want to spend money on Black people. Yeah. That's what this is. Because that's not happening anywhere else in that state.
No.
It's happening in Jackson.
Me about that. They said, well, I wonder what's happening with the folks in the suburbs. I said, well, considering that the folks in the suburbs are part of the legislature that struck down the money that Jackson needed to rebuild its water system, they're probably sitting drinking mint juleps and laughing their behinds off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's only, like I said, it's only because that city is like 82% African American.
Right.
And that's the reason this hasn't been taken care of. I just think it's that simple. Because anywhere this happens, Flint, Michigan, other places, it's a largely minority community.
Right. They haven't really
And they
been
get away
able
with
to
it.
drink. Right. They haven't really been able to drink the water in Flint. Man, it's been so long, I can't remember. You still have people drinking bottled water.
Early Obama administration,
Right. Because
you know?
Michigan had a law that appointed something called a special manager for communities that they felt weren't spending their money correctly. And one thing, because I remember seeing this on the Rachel Maddow show, one thing that ended up coming out when it came to this particular law was that most of the places it applied to had majority African American populations.
Yeah.
And folks were like, okay, so basically you're telling most of Black Michigan that it can't vote for its own government, that it can't spend its own money without your permission, and all of these things. And if nothing else, this should kind of motivate people in Philadelphia to vote, because if you do not think that the legislature in Harrisburg will attempt to do something like that here, you have not been paying attention.
That's
I'm
right.
telling you, everybody needs to listen, and listen closely to what Doug Mastriano is saying on the campaign trail. Because if you're not paying attention and he becomes the governor, which is totally possible, because let's face it, one of the bets I've never lost is that I bet somebody's going to go into a voting booth and do something completely ridiculous. It's possible. So you really need to hear what this person is saying. People didn't think that Donald Trump was going to win, so they didn't listen to him when he was on the campaign trail. And he ended up winning, and everything he said he was going to do, he did. And we're going to be recovering from that as a country for maybe the next couple of decades. So everybody needs to pay attention.
That's right. So we'd like to play our next interview, our next city council preview with Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. The first thing I'd like to talk to you about, city council's fall session is set to begin in a couple of weeks. What are your top priorities going into the fall?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you and Denise. I love talking city council with you guys. For me, first and foremost is going to be looking at the revenue that we have as a city, and what happens as it relates to transfer ordinances and how those dollars are appropriated as we close out this year's budget, because we do know that projections were a little conservative as it related to the June budget. And I'm curious to see what revenue looks like and what's the administration's plan on how we spend any leftover revenue this fall. Outside of that, I have a couple bills that I'm very proud of that I'm working on. We're really excited around them. One bill we're hoping is going to address illegal dumping. We have another bill that we're looking to do to address issues related to NIL, and that coming down the pipe. And then we're also looking at other quality of life things, as well as some interesting hearings that we know we need to have in order to examine things related to city departments as well as city partners. And of course, for me, I'm always going to talk issues around education, youth, and young people. So that will be a part of our work this fall. And to close it out, we're going to continue to work around driving equality as it relates to that bill, and analyzing the data and making sure that we're on track based on the legislation that was passed.
Tell us what NIL is really quick.
Oh, yeah, sure. Name, image, and like. It is something that's happening in sports where you're seeing a lot of college students getting deals. And pretty soon we're anticipating that the PIAA, which is the Pennsylvania Interscholastic Athletic Association, is going to vote on what they're going to allow for high school students, which means as early as this winter, we could have high school students in the city of Philadelphia who attend public schools getting NIL deals. And we want to make sure that it's regulated and there's no predatory behavior that exposes our young people to anything negative.
That is a little scary. I didn't realize it was going down to high school students too. I thought it was just going to be at the college level. That Yes, that definitely needs to be regulated and considered.
Absolutely. And we're already thinking about it from a legislative perspective. We're talking to some of our state partners as well to make sure that when you are legally allowed to have those dialogues and conversations and give those opportunities to high school students, that is done in a way that's conducive to them and their families, and it doesn't put them in a position where it turns into a negative.
So you had mentioned something I was going to bring up a little later. That's the budget surplus that the city is looking at right now, just over $400 million or so. You mentioned you want to see what the administration has in mind, but what do you have in mind for those funds? What is the best use of that money?
I mean, I'm not going to say what's best for all of it because I'm just one of 16 legislators currently right now. So it's going to be a lot of different folks who have a lot of different opinions. But one of the things that I will say that's going to be a priority for me is witness and victim protection. That is a huge issue that we have in the city of Philadelphia. And when we talk about the crime that exists in the city, I do think that there are systematic problems like poverty and like a lack of quality education in every school that feeds to the poverty problem that feeds to the crime problem that we see in the city of Philadelphia. And of course, until you fix those systematic things, those problems are going to still exist. But I do think that we have some holes in the system right now that can at least scale back some of the crime that we're seeing. And so when we're talking about money for witnesses and victims, that's going to be a huge priority for me. I think as a person who really cares about and works with young people on a consistent basis, I'm already thinking about next summer. So I would like to advocate now that we appropriate the dollars that we need for next summer. We examine what happened with summer employment opportunities for high school students, because that was a debacle that took place this summer, considering all the issues that high school students are facing. For us to fumble some of the things that we did as it relates to opportunities for high school students is an embarrassment. So when you ask me what my priorities are, I'm thinking about what we can do around crime right now. And I'm also thinking about what we need to do to prepare for next summer right now, so that when next summer comes and presents itself, we don't see this huge spike in crime like we've seen this summer. There are other things as well too, but those are going to be my top two priorities as it relates to how the anticipated revenue that we didn't necessarily project is spent.
Okay. So when you speak with your colleagues and when you're discussing, just generally what you're thinking about doing, do you have a feel for what some of the bigger themes from City Council is going to be this fall, what people are looking at and what sort of thing? No?
No, absolutely not. I mean, at the end of the day, come on, let's be honest. You know what the temperament is around City Council. So, from a revenue perspective, I'm sure everybody's going to have their pet projects and ideas, especially things around rebuild and looking at what needs to happen with rec centers now that bill essentially has been passed, and we can begin to see even more development there. But outside of that, people will have their legislative ideas. People will have, that's always the case. People will have the hearings that they want to hear. That's always the case. Once, I'm happy to be on the appropriations committee, so I get to be directly involved in conversations dealing with how dollars are spent, and I get a vote on that side of things. But no, I'm not having that type of in-depth dialogue with other council members because the climate here right now is one that's probably more uncertain than what we've seen in recent history.
And is that because of the potential mayoral candidates?
Absolutely, not just the resignation that's already taken place. Just had to remind myself that there are 16 of us and not 17 of us, but the anticipated resignations that folks are talking about. So at the end of the day, I think that kind of cloud is over the legislative branch as it relates to who your colleagues will be, who will be the chair of certain committees, and how will we govern this fall.
Okay. So we're still dealing with this epidemic of violence in the city. And one of the key drivers of violence is poverty. When we look at the 26% poverty rate, are there things that council can do this fall to help chip away at that?
Outside of the programs and protections that we have already, I'm not sure. I don't want to, Larry, I want to say no. I don't want to say no is nothing that we can do. But I don't have any specific bills that I'm going to be introducing this fall that I feel like directly impacts the poverty. It is a huge concern. Philadelphia is the city of a lot of, not just a lot of poverty, but a lot of working poor and a lot of children that live in poverty. So at the end of the day, we're constantly advocating and fighting with our state partners to be able to see an increase in the minimum wage. I'm a strong supporter of the Shapiro-Davis ticket, and I think that that is the right combination that we need to put us in a position to increase the minimum wage. We did take a vote in June that we hope will send a signal that Philadelphia is open for business, because we know that the more opportunities that we give entrepreneurs and business owners in the city of Philadelphia, especially homegrown business owners, the more employment opportunities are created for actual constituents here. But, you know, not to dance around your question, I don't have anything specifically that's coming down the pipe as it relates to legislation that can directly impact the poverty issue that we have that exists in the city of Philadelphia. But from a political perspective, I'm hoping to advocate and do what I need to do to help get the right people in Harrisburg so we can begin to see a dent in some of those issues that you just talked about.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, Councilmember. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, my question you mentioned that the vote that the city took that you hope will spur entrepreneurship. If my understanding is that had to do with the wage tax and some reductions being made to it. Can you talk a little bit about what your reasoning was behind taking that particular vote and what you see it doing for the city, particularly at a time where a lot of people who were working in city offices or offices in the city are now working from home?
Yeah, I think the wage tax cut was specifically to put us in a position where, number one, during the pandemic, we've really seen how much we rely on the wage tax and how dangerous it is from an economic perspective for our city to rely on the wage tax the way we do. When the pandemic hit and things shut down, the only major city in the country that lost more revenue than Philadelphia was Detroit. And that's not the way in the direction that we want to trend in. So one perspective around the wage tax is fiscal responsibility and trying to put us in a position where we don't rely on it as much as we did. But the bird tax cut specifically was the tax cut that we're hoping sends a signal that Philadelphia is open for business. And we're also hoping that we can put ourselves in a position where we can attract different industries and encourage more entrepreneurship. So that was the thought process there. We're doing other work with other industries like the gaming industry and industries that are innovative to begin to hopefully brand Philadelphia as a place that is not just a city of eds, meds, and beds, but that's a city that's open to biotech. That's a city that's open to gaming and coding and other industries that we know are really taking off in other places across the country. So we know we still have work to do as it relates to rebranding our city and branding our city in a way that attracts different industries. But we felt like this past budget was a step in the right direction.
But you have a lot of people in the city who, because we're the poorest big city in America, are kind of questioning whether now was the right time to cut any taxes with people still trying to recover financially from COVID. What, I guess, have people approached you with that? And can you explain it a little bit?
Well, I think that part of the reason why you're seeing this tax cut now is because of the surplus of revenue that we talked about a little bit earlier. We do have a surplus in revenue as it relates to support that we've received from the federal government. We also had very conservative numbers as it relates to anticipated tax dollars. And we're coming into the fall with one of the biggest surpluses that we've had, definitely the biggest surplus we've had since I've been in city council. So at the end of the day, this was really the only time to do it. If you look at our 5-year projections in the direction that we're going in over the next couple of years, it'll be very difficult to do it in the future because we're going to, the 5-year projections put us in a position where we're going to have to dip into our fund balance in order to make sure that we're meeting our annual operating budget numbers. So at the end of the day, this was the only time from a fiscal perspective that we knew we would have the revenue to be able to do it and without cutting any jobs or cutting city services or anything like that, and still be innovative with a lot of the programs recommendations that the mayor as well as council members wanted to see. So, you know, I think it was the right decision. I stand by the decision, and I think we're going to see the positive outcomes over the next couple months.
Now, when we talk about gun violence in the city, over the summer, Council President Clark had a news conference with several other members of council in which he brought up, among other things, in terms of combating the violence, stop and frisk. Now, last year, you got a law passed that made it so police officers couldn't stop you in what some folks thought of as a rolling stop and frisk, where, a tail light or something like that, relatively minor stuff, you couldn't get pulled over for. But you have people who are like, should we really have done that? Can you talk a little bit about the reaction to your bill and how, and whether or not this was what you were expecting?
Yeah, it's 100% what I was expecting. Anytime you try to do things and you're fighting for the civil rights of Black folks, you're automatically going to see a lot of people who push back, because there are a lot of people who benefit both personally as well as financially on the suffrage of poor people and people of color, but especially people of color. So I anticipated pushback. I knew there would be blowback, and none of that bothers me. We're focused on the work. We're focused on the data, and the data suggests that we're moving in the right direction as it relates to driving equality. At the end of the day, we're really proud of the fact that we do have an oversight committee. Those folks have been named, and that entire team has been working diligently throughout the summer and putting ourselves in a position where we are assessing what's going on. We're having constant conversation about motor vehicle stops in the city of Philadelphia, and we're doing everything in our power to make sure that the data reflects the intention of the bill. So the pushback that we hear is minimal, but is expected when you're fighting for the people that we're fighting for. And at the end of the day, we're going to continue to do the good work. And if the day comes where the data suggests that the bill is doing more harm than good, then I'll be the first one to introduce an amendment or look to appeal it. But right now, that's not at all what the data is saying. We are excited and we're optimistic about the direction that we're moving in right now.
Now, over the weekend, you and Council Member Johnson had a basketball tournament, Peace Not Guns basketball tournament, where you brought people in and let them play basketball as a means of keeping them from doing other stuff that could lead to gun violence. This is something you all have done over the last 2 years, and it's been successful. Has council talked at all about doing more of this kind of thing? Because let's face it, we've tried a whole bunch of other stuff. Why not do something that kids can get directly involved in that keeps them from getting involved in violence?
I mean, I spent my entire summer being involved in prevention-based initiatives. Councilmember Johnson and I did the Peace Not Guns tournament this weekend, like you talked about. I think the most exciting thing about it was watching the young people and their responses as we honored families of victims who have been lost to gun violence, and looking at their faces and hopefully putting them in a position where we're encouraging them, and the mothers and the families encouraging them to do their best, to be their best self, to maximize their potential, and to try their best to stay out of harm's way. And the interaction between the two is something that's priceless. So at the end of the day, outside of that event, I also did a free camp for 3 weeks in all different parts of the city of Philadelphia. We had well over 150 young people attend the camp, operating from 8 to 3. Another example of a partnership with Councilmember Johnson, because we partnered with him to come to South Philly for the camp for the first time. And I've been doing this camp for 10 years. So the prevention-based initiatives is something that I have grown in as it relates to that professional space. I understand the space very well. And during my first 3 years at council, I've been screaming at the top of my lungs that we as a city do not offer enough free programming for young people. I'm pretty sure that I have one of the biggest camps in the entire city. The last week of my camp in Philly, we had about 130 children on a daily basis in camp. And it's a free program. It's a basketball camp, but I can tell you that, at least 50% of the children who come to the camp don't play basketball. They're not there for basketball. They're there to have fun. They're there because it's safe, and their parents are signing them up because it's a free resource that's safe, that also teaches a lot of positivity. So at the end of the day, I've been screaming at the top of my lungs since I've been on city council that we do not do enough as it relates to investing in prevention-based initiatives. I get it when it comes to intervention-based initiatives, but if you're intervening, that person is already involved in the criminal justice system. If we are investing in prevention-based initiatives, we could catch a lot of young people before they get involved in the criminal justice system and try to make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. And that is one place that we are failing as government right now.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned that you were going to be introducing some legislation related to witness protection. Witness protection has been a big problem in the city of Philadelphia. And I think this is one of the only times I've heard council or anyone on council even talk about addressing it. What made you decide to address it, and what if you can talk a little bit about what it is you're hoping to get passed? I know you probably are still crafting the legislation, but if you could tell me just some of the stuff that may be in it.
I mean, what made me do it is the fact that my office and our team over here in City Council, we've spent our entire summer doing a deep dive into the crime issue. I've been in gun court, I've been a part of briefings, I've been in the conversations, working with victims and families. I've done a really deep dive into the issue, and I still have a lot more work to do. The deeper dive I do into the issue, the more I realize that there are so many moving parts to the criminal justice system and the crime issue in the city of Philadelphia. And so with that being said, it's not just about witnesses, it's witnesses and victims. In the city of Philadelphia right now, the police and the district attorney, that collaborative effort, they're more likely to solve a crime if the person is executed compared to if the person stays alive. That's alarming right there, right? Like that's a telling stat that we do better clearing cases when the victim is dead compared to when the victim is alive. So we need to do something different. That clearly tells us that our system is broken. And one of the things that I'm recommending is more money for witnesses and victims, right? Because at the end of the day, it's one thing to provide dollars for a witness, but also we need to be able to provide more support systems for victims, not just some level of protection, but often some level of relocation needs to happen to coincide with that protection. So at the end of the day, what we're going to be fighting for is more revenue. It's not necessarily legislation that would change how we treat witnesses or victims. I'm on the appropriations committee, and we want to see some revenue as it relates to a transfer ordinance specifically targeted to the specific demographic that we're talking about, which is witnesses and victims.
Okay, I have one last question. As you know, for all intents and purposes, the 2023 mayor's race has started, which means many of your colleagues are seriously thinking about whether or not they're going to resign to run. You are one of the youngest members in council. And I remember covering your campaigns and seeing you, try to negotiate the fact that the city's coat of arms should say that's the way we've always done it. And they're pretty committed to that. I wanted to find out if you were talking to one of your mentees who was interested in pursuing a career in politics and wanted to run for city council at large or even a city council district seat, what would you tell them and why?
Oh, I asked them, are you crazy? Like, what are you thinking? No, in all seriousness, it's a lot. I've run 3 times. So, at the end of the day, I'll be seeking re-election next year, God willing. And the first, it's a lot of advice I would give. I probably could do a whole show just on what it would take to run for city council, specifically council at large, because the race is its own dynamic. It's its own DNA. It's like a combination of running to be a legislator as well as running for judge, right? Because you're not necessarily running against a person. And I think sometimes demographic politics puts us in a position where we feel like we're running against somebody because we fit this similar demographic. And people will say that it's only such and such, only this many of a type of person can be on city council. So the first thing I would say is ignore demographic politics. Don't put yourself in a position where you feel like your competition is the other people running. You're running against yourself, and that's what makes this race unique. your goal is to touch as many people as you can. And it's very difficult to do that when you don't have money, especially when you're talking about an open mayoral race where you're going to see a lot of the airways being congested with folks encouraging people to vote for them for mayor. So, you know, with that being said, outside of the revenue, I would also tell people to look at your personal life, because when you decide to run for office, it's not just you that's impacted, it's your entire family. Your time is impacted if you're doing it the right way. Being a candidate is your full-time job. So at the end of the day, you're often unable to pay your bills. I think that's a significant part of running for office that people don't realize, is that it monopolizes so much of your time that if you're a credible candidate, it's impossible to run for office while simultaneously working a full-time job. I tried it. It's doesn't have a good outcome. So at the end of the day, those are just two things off the top of my head, you know, that I would talk to people about as it relates to your personal life, as well as your network. Like, do you have the network that can put you in a position to raise the money that you need? And then also, are you able to take the sacrifices that's needed as it relates to your personal life, not just financially, but with your time, to put yourself in a position to campaign for 4 or 5 months. It's very, very difficult. I'm blessed to have the support systems that put me in a position to be able to do it multiple times. And if you were a mentee of mine, you know, I would have got you started well before today. That's another thing.
Okay. Well, thank you, council member. I'm turning this back over to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Holman.
Thanks, Denise. Councilman, one last question before we let you go. As Denise said, we are in this election cycle already, whether we like it or not. So what are the qualities you are looking for in the next mayor?
That's a great question. I mean, what I'll say is a lot of qualities. You have to be a visionary. You know, we have systematic issues that need to be corrected. So you got to understand the system and the infrastructure and the problems that we're dealing with. But, you know, honestly, I think that the one piece of advice, and I remember being on a panel in Atlantic City with some of my council colleagues, and we got asked this exact same question, and they actually made me go first. And I'll say what I said there because I feel the exact same way. You know, outside of being a big picture thinker, outside of having being able to develop plans for systematic problems, especially when we're talking about how government works, even on the education side, how the school district works, we have a lot of systematic problems, infrastructure issues, and things that require complex thinking and innovative solutions. And, you know, I could do a deeper dive into some of these systematic problems that we have in the city. Outside of all of that, I think that the biggest issue that we have is the cloud of depression over the city of Philadelphia. So I think that the next mayor, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what's going on, you got to be able to grab the mic, go in front of the camera, and make the citizens of Philadelphia feel like everything is going to be okay. And I think that is something that we take for granted. You know, I've run for office a lot of times, and I think that it's important that we put ourselves in a position where we recognize that people are depressed. The city is depressed. People need to be inspired. And at the end of the day, with some of the catastrophes that we've faced over the last couple of years, it's imperative that people feel like they have a good quality leader who they can depend on, who they know is thinking about the best interests of the city 24/7. And the biggest thing is that we need a mayor and a leader who has the ability to make people feel like everything is going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. And I'm going to be able to fix the issues that we face as a city. Because even if you can have the ability to have that innovative thinking, to be able to come up with systematic solutions, you still need to put yourself in a position to address some of the perception issues that we have as a city. And that's something that's very difficult.
We would like to thank Isaiah Thomas and Kendra Brooks for being with us. And next week on the show, we will have David O, Councilmember David O, and Councilmember Helen Gim. So thank you all for being with us, and we will see you next week.